Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, Building Effective Mobile Screens. My name is Jake Potter, and I'm the Marketing Manager for Magic Software. And with me today, I've got Joe De Silva. Just before we start the webinar, apologies for the delay there. We thought we'd give you some facts about mobile, just so we can wait for everyone to join. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the questions panel. It's towards the bottom of your screen. If you just type them in there, then we'll answer the questions at the end of the webinar. And if due to time restraints we're unable to answer your questions, we will send you an email afterwards. And also follow us on Twitter if you use Twitter at Magic Software UK, and you can keep updated with all the Magic Software news. I'm going to pass you over to Joe now.
Thank you, Jake. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. My plan is just to give you a quick overview and consideration of some points when you're creating any application, particularly if you have experience and coming from developing desktop applications, and some points that you probably want to consider in looking into some platform to help you out with some of these challenges. The first one would be, how do you provide access to your critical business processes on all devices? So at the moment we have all this list of devices, and when we say create a mobile app, how do we cover all those devices? And this is the first challenge. How do you choose which one you're going to support, and what are the characteristics of each one? But also, if you think in terms of the data and the information or the business process attached to each screen or button or action, how does that links back to the business process that you are implementing or that you have in your company? But once you create the app, how do you focus on the experience on those mobile scenarios? What are some points that we want to consider that I'm going to discuss this morning? And there's also a pressure to support more and more devices. So every day, as you probably follow this week, we have new devices out. Some vendors do facilitate that, and they tend to provide some sort of support for new versions, despite the changes in screens and details, definitions, resolution, etc. But it's not always. If you want to provide to multiple platforms, then you will have a constant challenge of adapting your application to still work, to still helps your user to focus on their actions they're trying to achieve at that specific point in time. So let's discuss a little bit of how you design some of these applications and some design choices that you might want to consider. The first one would be the typical mobile phone. So you have, if you think of the list of mobile phones that you will select to support, you plan to support it initially, you need to consider this level of detail. So for your application specifically, how your phone is going to be used, how big the screen's variations are, and which areas of those screens are easier to access and which one provide a bit more challenge to access by the end user. So this is the first important consideration. Look into your application specifically, look into the devices, do some tests, and find those areas, because this will be very important for you to lay out things and provide the detail, the data, etc. in your application. So the first objective would be to look for a natural interaction or movement of the way the people use your application. So typically they'll be using with a thumb, and that will be moving normally again from left to right. And also, if your device or the devices you want to support are used by one hand or both hands or both thumbs, or allow them to type with multiple fingers. But this is the point: is how the data will flow and what will make sense for your application. This is just an example here, but do consider that natural movement in terms of who is going to use your application and what for. One other point is that we tend, coming from other desktop development, the size of buttons have a specific design criteria. But for a phone in particular, we do have to consider the size of a typical size of the area that people can actually be able to touch. So you have to consider minimum size for that button so people can reach and touch the right one. Still with the button idea, what we need to consider also besides the size of the button is where we put them. So are they easy and nicely located in a way that there's a clear indication of where to touch, and they're not too small where the user end up touching the wrong one. And sometimes you do have to arrange the space around the buttons, as the example showing on the screen, that facilitates the user to select the right one that they intended. Contrast is also very helpful in that sense, because we need to remember that people on the phone are typically moving about, and the attention is much less than sitting in front of the desktop. Text might help, but the design and the function and the spaces are the most important points there. If you can and have control on the multiple applications or multiple screens, it's important that you consider the position as well, and this all helps the usage of your application. If we're trying to keep it simple and consistent, the reason is to avoid the user to have to think too much, particularly remembering that they're more likely to be moving about, so they don't have to really insist on a lot of attention to decide. And your consistency on the presentation would be a bit of a burden, so try to avoid this type of information. As the example on the screen is a very heavy screen, very small buttons, requires more like a reading type of application, probably useful for a desktop or a tablet, but interesting choice in terms of mobile usage. Colors also help navigation and to be interesting to use, pleasant, attractive. These are things that help besides the level of contrast. And sometimes you do have to think very hard and discuss with your designers, because you might be connected to a specific brand identity or your company identity, and that might limit your choices to use colors and contrast, but your designer will help you there. So if you're a typical developer, you will need help from the designers to consider all that. Make your users feel comfortable and at home. That's very important. And if you have multiple screens, as you certainly would, make clear where the navigation, going back, etc., are located. Most platforms have their own way of navigate. So for iOS, typically the navigation is at the top, and for Android, there's a button, typically a physical button as well. So these are things that you need to consider, but the action could be, you could be thinking is just how to navigate, how to go back. One other consideration is to put what's more important first, so which means that your application might change or the presentation of your application might change as they are used. So again, to minimize the need of too much navigation and allow immediate action, or even classify it by importance. as well. As an example here, if we presenting stories or news, probably the most relevant, the last news or the latest news are more important. But you might have some financial analysis, and you might even add some more analytical side on the server side to present and select what's more important for your application. So that's also something new that you can use, but it will influence your UI as well. So giving the user a clear direction by using multiple pages or where to go next is obviously very important, but you see that there are multiple ways to do that. So if you look at these two screens, they're quite contrasting in terms of design and attraction, etc. But you might find that what works best for your user, as long as you are providing them with a nice way to go next and do whatever they want to do at a specific moment. Menus are or have been coming back to more mobile applications, and you can see two examples here that they are useful, and because they typically use a lot of space, they tend to hide. So these are, again, kind of defaults for each platform, but very useful and make sense in a lot of cases. If you have a lot of processes that you want to display, sometimes you might want to not to squeeze too much information on one screen. Again, this will be a very hard choice and depends on the usage, and you will need definitely all the designers involved into this. If you look at this application, which is one of very used application if you're flying small planes around, so you probably use this application a lot. But if you are targeting another type of user that just want to see what the weather is like, maybe there are too much information there, even though it's very technical for if you're a pilot, as I said. But another choice could be in this example. So at a very first glance, I can see all the important information that I wanted to find out, but then I miss the detail. So to get into more detail, then I can navigate and then still find out. So these are two contrasting choices to very different audiences. And on the left, probably very technical appeal. On the right, very consumer immediate, more responsive. So not saying there's anything wrong with one or the other, but you need to weigh that in terms of your target audience. And it's very important to avoid waiting. And here you need to use a platform that do respond quite quickly and allows you to deploy not only a very lean client side, but also respond back from the server when you need more heavy analysis, and try to give your user immediate feedback, and buttons should react when touched as opposed to no sign. The user will then tend to touch them again and again. And to minimize, you might have to rethink in terms of your application, how you split, how much should you delegate to the server in the background, but remove any non-critical data transfer, and keeping each screen very focused on what the user is trying to achieve, and as minimum information as needed. So there's been quite a lot of famous choices and comments since Apple entered the iPhone market or the phone market, because always trying to find the balance of minimum information and to the user that's still attractive, still interesting. But if you do have to process things that do take some time, need to go to server or do some analysis, etc., you can provide an indication of progress and then an alert back, so the user know that they can do something else while that long process takes place. The input is another challenge. So how do you balance the minimum information, particularly if your application do require input? So the first challenge is let's reduce input as much as we can. But if we do have to provide some means for the user to enter a lot of data, let's do it in a way that helps that. So the typical case is turning the phone to the side, and you get a much better keyboard, etc. So these are thoughts and applications that helps that when you do have input. And the final, probably one of the final points is to get the user testing. So sometimes you do have to delegate this to some company or services, but it's fundamental. You have to involve all the use case, real-world scenarios, field testings with all the devices you want to support, all the typical users that are targeted to your application. And recall that, try to get that feedback in terms of different experiences, and you might have to redo your design or tweak your design to adapt to that. But don't forget your focused users and target users. There are specific expectations for each platform, and so that needs to be considered, and that in terms of development presents a large chunk of challenge, but a platform could help you on that as well by supporting specific device navigation, for example, and without you having to adapt your code to that. Look and feel we did quite a bit, but do remember that some devices have physical elements that need to be supported as well. Again, a platform should take care of that for you, so you can focus more on the look and feel, the navigation, the importance of the usage, the use cases. We invite you to try our platform, so you can download and get any free session to build a proof of concept or any prototype that you might have in mind. And you can partner with us if you are providing applications to target the market, either business side or consumer side. And thank you very much. This is my part, and please do accept our invitations to try and let us know if we can help in any way.
Okay, thanks, Joe. I'm just going to give the attendees a minute to write any questions into the questions pane. Okay, so I can't see any questions coming in for now. If you do have any questions, do send them through. You can send me an email or send me a tweet at Magic Software UK. So thank you for coming. We've got another webinar coming up in just 2 weeks' time, which is about creating offline mobile apps. So you'll get an email flying your way not next Monday, but the Monday after. Thank you for coming. I hope you have a good weekend.